Hey guys, welcome to episode number 8 of our Metal Tone in the Mix series. Now, this is actually our final episode in this series. Don't be sad, because this episode is going to be pretty cool. Now, I want to share some additional insights in regards to pretty much everything we've been through up to this point. And on that note, no pun intended, if you have not watched this series, if you have not watched these episodes, Metal Tone in the Mix, I encourage you to go back through and start at number 1, and I'll go ahead and put the playlist for this episode up here. Start watching that, and then you can come back and watch this video because it will be the last video in that playlist. Now make sure you hang around for the end of this video because I've got a little surprise that I'm going to share with you, and I think you're going to find this to be pretty cool. Alright, so let's run through this real quick. I want to go through each episode really quickly here and just kind of give you some additional insights along the way. Part 1 of Metal Tone in the Mix, we went over everything. I mean, we covered your amp, your mic, the hardware, your interface, the software you need to record with. I even covered the cables you needed. The reason I went into so much detail on this, I mean literally like everything you need is in that video. Most of you are recording at home just like I do. This is my home studio. And let's be real honest, you can get the same quality, you can produce the same quality music in your studio if you do it the right way, like we went through in this series here, that some high-end studio can give you. In fact, you and I both have probably heard mixes that sound better coming out of small home studios like this than the mixes we've heard coming out of some of the bigger name studios. So that was the goal of episode number 1, is just to give you every single component that I could possibly think of that you needed. In part 2, episode 2, we talked about the best metal guitar. And I think we pretty much concluded that it boils down to what you like. It boils down to personal preference. And one of the things we talked about was active versus passive pickups. And that's why I used a guitar, this Ibanez Prestige RG 1570, that has stock passive pickups in it. I used this guitar here for that specific reason for this series, Metal Tone in the Mix, because I wanted to show you guys that you don't have to necessarily have active pickups, which I know active pickups sound awesome, but it's not necessary to have that. And again, this guitar not only has passive pickups, but they're stock. They're the Ibanez V7, S1, and V8 pickups. Those aren't really built per se to do metal music, but we made it work anyway. And actually, I kind of like the way those sound sometimes better than some of the other pickups that I've heard that are built for metal. So again, there really is no best guitar for metal. It all boils down to your personal preference. And of course, I always encourage you to just use what you have and don't overthink that. The important thing is that the guitar plays well, it fits well in your hands, and it kind of caters to your style, and that you like the tone. In part 3, we went into the amp settings, and I gave you guys the ideal amp and EQ and gain settings and all that good stuff, the ideal settings for recording your guitar to get that good tone that's going to sit well in the mix. And we talked about your bedroom tone being a little bit different than what your recorded tone is going to be when you're recording for the full mix, when you're actually recording a song. If you're working on a song like a single or an album and you intend on having drums and bass and other instruments and vocals and all that, you need a tone that's going to sit well in that mix. And again, that tone is probably going to be a bit different than your bedroom tone or your practice tone, or just when you're just jamming by yourself. In episode number 4, we talked about mic placement on your amp, and this is another like really crucial point to getting a good tone that's going to sit well in the mix. And of course, getting a tone that you like. Oftentimes when we're playing in our room, that sound that we're getting, even if you're recording, even when you have your amp settings all set up like you should, like in the prior episode, sometimes what we're hearing in the room, or in the studio rather, is not going to be quite the same when we hear it recorded, when we go back and play that back. So that's those times when you can really play around with the mic placement. And I gave you some ideal placements for your mic. I think I gave you like 5 examples in that video. And I showed you some different ways you can kind of mix that up and just get a really nice metal tone. That was a really fun episode, by the way. In episode number 5, we got down to business and we actually recorded our metal rhythm guitar tracks. That was a really fun episode as well. And I showed you guys the way I record my metal rhythms. And what I do is I'll record the first track, hard pan that left, then I'll open up that new track and go ahead and pan that right so that I can hear the guitar I just recorded in this ear, which is my left ear. And as I'm recording that other track, I hear that in my right ear, so I get that full stereo effect. but more importantly, that is going to make for a really awesome mix. And also talked a little bit about how you can kind of change up the tone for that second guitar track, make it slightly different so that you can capture even more of those nuances. Because remember, when you play that second guitar track, your notes aren't going to be like 100% lined up with that first guitar, and that's what gives you that liveliness. Now, you don't want to be like off on your timing, you don't want to be completely off, but you are going to have some slight discrepancies in there, and that's why we record that second guitar track. And of course, we hard pan the guitar tracks, because when they're up the middle, it kind of sounds a little muddy, but when you hard pan them, you can really like hear those guitars clearly, and those subtle little nuances, again, that just brings so much organic life to your guitar tracks. In episode number 6 of Metal Tone in the Mix, you recorded your lead guitar track. You got down to some solos there, which that was really cool to see how that worked and how that integrated with the already recorded rhythm tracks. And I gave you some tips on how you don't have to completely change all your settings to record your lead track. We looked at the amp's gain and the EQ, and I gave you some tips on that, just a couple settings you can change there by just bumping the gain up a little bit, maybe giving that lead track a little bit more bottom end, because remember, we cut that a little bit for our rhythm tracks. But it's okay to have a little bottom end on your lead track because you're playing mostly single notes, so that's not going to muddy up your mix. And then we talked about the mic placement as well. We just like bumped that mic placement a little bit more towards the cone there, and that just kind of helps your lead guitar track cut through the mix better. Episode number 7, part 7 of Metal Tone in the Mix. I took you through the post-production phase, the post-processing that you do to your guitar tracks after everything is recorded. And I shared 2 simple plugins that you already have in your DAW, by the way, so you don't have to buy anything extra. And that was a compressor. That's the main plugin that you want to use. And the reason we put that plugin in that track, or in those tracks rather, is because that smooths everything out. It takes care of those peaks and brings up some of those lows. It just smooths your guitar tracks out, and of course that makes for a better sounding overall mix. And I shared a few more plugins as well. We talked about the possibility of using an EQ plugin on your tracks, and we also talked about your lead guitar track, how you can drag in effects on that track, such as a delay if you want some delay on your lead guitar track, which a lot of us guitar soloists, we want some of that delay and sometimes some reverb and other effects. And we kind of chatted about how it might be safer to use those effects in post-processing rather than using the pedals and the hardware, because remember, if you're using pedals on your amp when you're recording that, if you don't like that sound later, if you don't like those effects, well, it's kind of too bad. You're either stuck with it or you got to go back and re-record those tracks. Now it's the part you've all been waiting for. If you remember, in each episode, I had at least one full mix track in each episode of Metal Tone in the Mix. So what I've done is I've just compiled all those together, all 7 of them, and I'm going to let you hear those back to back right now. also watch my complete tutorial on recording and mixing metal guitars. It's kind of a higher level overview of everything that we've gone through, and you'll probably learn some additional things in that video as well, but I'll put that link up here, so go check that out if you haven't seen that yet. And I just want to tell you, thank you so much for watching this Metal Tone in the Mix series. I truly hope this series helped you guys. I know there's a lot of questions when it comes to recording guitars, what to use, what plug-in, what amp, mic placement, and all this good stuff. So I really did my best to cover all of these things, and hopefully I answered a lot of questions during this series. If you have additional questions, please drop those in the comments below. Also, let me know in the comments if this series helped you, and hey, let me know what your favorite episode was, 1 through 7. Just drop those in the comments. I'd love to know that. So guys, thank you so much again for supporting my channel here. Also, real quick, in the description of this YouTube channel, there's a link where you can get my free metal riffs and licks. It's a guitar practice guide. I know a lot of you probably already have that, but if you don't have that, grab your copy. Again, that link is in the YouTube description here. Guys, thank you so much for supporting my music and my channel. Until the next video, keep it metal.